Hello, everybody, and welcome back to class. This is lesson 23, Why Razors Can't Cut Through Truth. Now, when we're mentioning razors and things like that, we're actually discussing the philosophical razors that people use. Uh, let's get into it. We'll start off with the definition, by all means. A principle or rule of thumb that allows one to eliminate or shave off unlikely explanations for a phenomenon or avoid unnecessary actions. So, some of the razors that you might be familiar with is things like Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation usually is the correct one. Now, if you have Sherlock theory or you study deduction and things like that, you pretty much boil everything down to the smallest thing, and then that will eliminate any things from happening. Then you have Hanlon's razor. Never attribute malice to which can be treated uh, equitably or equally equitably explained by stupidity. And there's a lot of other ones here, like Hitchens' razor, Sagan's standard, Adler's razor, Newton's flaming laser sword. I know that sounds crazy, but if something cannot be settled by experiment or observation, then it is not worth debating. So let's talk about that for a second because a lot of people are logical, scientific, and they lack creativity. So therefore, when they see a magic trick, they're more concerned on how the magic trick was done than enjoying the show. And this is where people differentiate between creativity and logic. But remember, at the end of the day, because this is class, which is on creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality, everything you're supposed to learn in life, you get your bachelor's in your arts and your sciences, but you don't realize that until you need a degree to get a job. So think about that before you start questioning certain things and blaming stupidity or science doesn't make sense. Well, art doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but everybody wants to see Mona Lisa smile. So let's move forward. What is truth? Truth is a state or quality of being in accordance with fact, reality, or logic, right? So that's the definition of truth. You can Google it, you can go to Webster's dictionary, so on and so forth. Most people don't know the power that a great story can do. So this is why we have philosophical razors as well, somewhat of an understanding of truth that goes against, creativity and leans more towards logic. Because remember, logic is black and white. Think like a game of chess or checkers. The rules are there. Nobody could change the rules. It's not like inflation or taxes or anything else that happens in the world that can be changed all the time. So when you have set rules in a set game, so on and so forth, then things become interesting, but you can only do so much. When things become, how do I say this, unpredictable, when things start getting too creative, so on and so forth, that's where people start to feel either restrictive, scared, or fear. Because, people normally fear the unknown. Now, let's talk about a great story. One of the stories that a lot of people talk about is religion and stuff like that, so on and so forth. Well, one of these stories I heard was called From Warrior to Gardener and Caretaker. Now, there's an acronym that a buddy of mine came up with, and it said, Help Junior Believers Create Imagination, right? So I said, why imagination? Why not like invention, so on and so forth, etc.? He goes, because, not everybody wants to create something, but they do have an imagination. And without an imagination, wondering what's more, what else is out there, if I will get the girl, if I won't get the girl, so on and so forth. These are the things that the imagination, takes place and takes a hold of it and gives you either, depending on your upbringing, environment, psychological, behavioral understanding, and everything else, whether or not you're going to look at it positively or with an optimistic mindset or pessimistically with a negative mindset. So when it comes to warrior to gardener to caretaker, what this is an acronym of is pretty much all the major religions. So you have Hinduism, you have Judaism, you have Buddhism, you have Christianity, and you have Islam, right? And then, of course, there's others. However, these are the biggest that have been around for the longest, and they all reflect certain attributes from each other, right? And when we're looking at it, one of the things that people want is either love, a family, obviously, right? Of someone to be their companion. That's why people get pets, cats, dogs, fish, etc. That's why people have best friends, etc., so on and so forth. But then what about the other people that are loners? Well, their imagination leaves them to speculate certain things and they wonder what if. If you ever visited an old folks' home, which I have, a couple of the people in there will dictate that you should not live your life based upon what if, because you're going to get to a point in life where you cannot carry out some of the things that you wanted to do when you were younger. And when you're older, if you've never carried them out, well, you're going to keep wondering, and it's going to leave a negative sediment or regret when you hear the success stories of others. So, when it comes from warrior to gardener to caretaker, let's talk about not the main characters in the thing, but let's talk about, well, we'll start off with Judaism, Christianity, so on and so forth. They have spiritual gods. Remember, Greek mythology had demigods, so on and so forth, similar to Hercules, but he wasn't Zeus. So, what about angels, right? In a lot of books, you have Michael, who was a warrior, this general, so on and so forth. But then when you go to Islam, he's more of a caretaker. He provides food, water, shelter, so on and so forth. If we were to make this into a more modern time, you would think of the movie John Wick. He was eventually moving from John Wick status to, well, Winston. If you remember Winston in the movie John Wick, he was in charge of the Continental, everything that kept you safe, provided food, water, etc., so on and so forth. But there were rules in place, and Winston acted like a referee, so on and so forth. He wasn't the John Wick character anymore, nor was he in that scene. Right? Just like the way the story continues. I mean, think about it. The story always continues going, right? So if you were to take this now and create the movie Gladiator with Maximus Decimus Meridius, right? He was a warrior, a general, so on and so forth, that got captured and all these other things, but he eventually ended up dying in the movie, spoiler alert, but he wanted to go back to his farm and be with his family and take care of them. Granted, he was great at his job. However, that's what he wanted to do. But people kept antagonizing him, kept pushing him, kept doing this, that, and the third, and bending and breaking everything in his life until he snapped and came back, similar to the movie John Wick. They kept asking him, "Are you back? Are you back? Are you back?" Until finally, after killing his dog, killing his wife, all these other things, blowing up his house, everything else, probably copying stuff that he was doing and everything. And finally, he just said he had enough, because enough is enough. I think Cardi B made that song popular. But anyways, you get the idea, right? So let's talk about moving forward, right? How can you provide value to others while also having others provide value to you? Um, if you ever heard of the motto, all for one and one for all, it represents unity, loyalty, and mutual support among individuals in a group. It emphasizes a couple things, right? So, all for one, the group stands together to support and protect each individual. One for all, each individual is committed to the welfare of the entire group. Now, if you read the Constitution, it has something similar to it, right? We, the people of the United States, that's within the preamble. However, it also talks about being united, right? United we stand, divided we fall. Well, the best way to get rid of somebody you don't like is to create division in their life. Make sure you segment everything, because psychologically, people have the ability to take a lot of small problems, bundle them up like a snowball, and then create this one big problem that creates anxiety, stress, depression, dis-ease, or disease, so on and so forth, etc. Now, the motto, all for one and one for all, was a famous phrase that became popular through the Three Musketeers. Now, the Three Musketeers, that was written by Alexander Dumas, and if you remember previous lessons that I taught, you remember that he's one of my favorite authors due to the fact that I love the story The Count of Monte Cristo. And that story is not only about revenge, but how his best friend betrayed him to get with his girlfriend because he wanted what he had, even though he had all the money and everything else in the world, right? And there was a quote in there where his quote unquote best friend that betrayed him, his fiance, I should say, told him that when they were boys, Edmond Dantes was so happy with his whistle, Even though the other one got everything, he still wanted Edmund's whistle because of how happy, the joy, the excitement, everything that he exuded when he got that one thing, right? So let's get into this because this phrase is not only very popular, but you also see it in distress signals when it comes to females when they're in a public environment, right? They hold up four fingers, they cross the thumb over, they fold the fingers over, and it's a sign of distress, right? But you have all for one, right? So everybody for one person that feels like they're in distress, and that's how you go ahead and silently let people know, hey, I'm in trouble, I need somebody to help me. And then, of course, anybody within the vicinity that has a mind of their own that actually studied and knows what it means, knows to stand up and do something or distract or whatever. So if you haven't been educated on this, well, this is something that you will now learn. And for you females out there or males, if you ever feel like you're in distress, always go to a camera if you feel that way, or you could do it in front of your laptop if you're really in distress and do that hand signal, and it will notify authorities, so on and so forth, etc. So the phrase all for one with the Three Musketeers. Now, I love this, right? Because the Three Musketeers were pretty much like a wily bunch, so on and so forth, etc. But they had a gentleman that was trying to become a musketeer, and he was trying to prove himself because his father was one, so on and so forth, etc. Now, symbolizing brotherhood, teamwork, solidarity, it also uses various social, political, military contexts to express collective responsibility and mutual aid. The motto also extends into science, specifically medicine, and psychology, with the healing one person or one nation, right? So it really depends on the area of medicine that you're studying. I mean, in psychology, you have the disc personality types, right? The four different characters that you can utilize to sum up what someone's behavior is like, what their personality is like, so on and so forth. Then you have the Myers Briggs personality exam, 16 personality types, all to understand one person in a four-letter code. Hold on. Forgive me, I'm recording this outside and it's kind of loud. However, so the 16 personality types, Myers Briggs personality test, has a four code system that helps you understand an individual psychological background, such as ENTJ, INFJ, so on and so forth. If you study Tai Lopez, there's something known as the PACE system. And I think in the Netflix TV show with some Marine, he says to a sheriff or a crooked law enforcement, PACE. That's the acronym you're going to have to worry about now. And that's just an inside joke. But if you understand and you know, now you know. So let's keep moving forward and rolling with it, shall we? So, why do we do what we do? And when I make this statement of why do we do what we do, I'm talking about what drives us, what motivates us, what inspires us. And the reason why I broke it up into those three things is because, yes, you can have motivation to get out of bed. You can have drive to get into the car, but what's inspiring you to take the action, to get out of bed, to get into the car, to start the engine, so on and so forth. And you have to have those things go off. You have to have those things go off in order for you to carry out something. Now, different people have different motivational triggers. This is not anything that's new. If you studied Carl Jung or the grandfather of psychology, Freud, a couple other people, it becomes pretty interesting when you understand how you can take, let's say, the disc personality type, and it fits a larger amount of people. But then if you were to take the Myers-Briggs personality type, you realize there's like 16 personality types on there and a four-letter code that you can utilize. Then you have the PACE system, which mimics the disc personality type, but it's a little bit different. So, go ahead. I strongly encourage you to go ahead and look into these things and to, research what best suits you so that you can then help others understand what's going on in the world, what's around them, and you have a better way of communicating with them, right? Because if we talk about perception versus perspective, which is, I think, lesson one in class, You would be able to understand, the difference if you were able to shift the focus of certain individuals. So moving forward, I had this question come up not too long ago. It said, what does it mean to emulate or imitate? So I mentioned Scuba Steve one time, and it's an inside thing like a ghostwriter, a pen name, nickname, so on and so forth, etc. But what does it mean to emulate or imitate? Now, if you study poetry, there was a gentleman, I'm not even going to begin to try to pronounce his name. However, hold on. He had a long nose. He didn't think he was attractive enough to woo the woman of his dreams. So, what he did in return was he hooked his boys up with the words that he would use. Hey, say this, do this. Think Hitch, right? If you've seen the movie Hitch with Will Smith, that's exactly what he did. He was kind of like a Cupid, if you want to make that analogy, right? However, he was not just emulating certain characteristics of poetic backgrounds and romance and the ideologies that rest upon the mind of anybody that takes that in. However, he was a student of human behavior. He was a student of understanding. Remember, people want to be felt, heard, and understood. Most people will say something like this, and if you're ever in a relationship, whether it's friends or not, if you'll hear the comment, I feel like you're listening to me, but you don't understand me, or vice versa. And the thing is that people need to be understood. And in order to understand somebody, you have to understand their terminology, their tonality, their pitch, how they're positioning themselves. Because at the end of the day, and you'll also hear this, nobody's a mind reader. However, people do want mind readers in their life. So it's up to the gentleman and the others to step it up and, as Tony Robbins would say, step up or raise your standard, right? And if you haven't studied Tony Robbins, by all means, take a look at him. Great guy. I did UPW, walked across fire, hot coals, and all that. It was crazy, I know, and amazing at the same time. So I want you guys to remember that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and to emulate or to shine or bounce off or reflect someone or to imitate is to show them not only credit but to show them that you look up to them in certain aspects of their life, right? Because you have to remember, and remember this quote well, it was said by Johnny Depp, we are all children looking for someone to guide us, right? And to give you an example of what I mean, well, some people have God, some one thing, right, that they look up to. Some people have the president of the United States. Some people have doctors, lawyers, law enforcement, so on and so forth. And when we talk about personality types, we could talk about the spiritual world because, well, in the spiritual world, when it comes to personality types, they may depict somebody as being a lion, an ox, an eagle, or a human, or whatever. Look at the Native American tribes. They would send people out into the wilderness, so on and so forth. They would get their warrior name or their other name by the animal that they saw or their spirit animal. If you watch Harry Potter, this is known as a Patronus charm, so on and so forth, etc. So you can see how all these things come together to understand one thing. And I mean, Da Vinci, of all people, with the Venturian Man, depicting the breakdown of the skeletal structure of the human body. I mean, not most people know that your forearm is the same size as your foot. So if you want to know your shoe size, just take your shoe and hold it up to your forearm. Your hip to waist ratio is part of the golden ratio, right? However, if you want to know your pant size, but you don't want to change or there's no changing room, you can take your pants and wrap it around your neck, and the circumference around your neck equals the circumference around your waist. So these are some things that offer insight into the aspects of why people should ask more questions before everything else. Most people have a tendency to make statements instead of asking questions. And that's perfectly fine. However, if you want to be interesting, you have to be interested. And the only way to be interested is by asking the question, how's your day, and genuinely meaning it. And then to understand what it is that they're going through, right? So remember, this is all to understand one thing. This is why I love the motto, all for one and one for all. Because no matter how much people try to push against it, when something's going wrong, when there's a medical issue, when there's psychology involved, whether it's relationships, family, so on and so forth, etc., it's all normally boils down to one thing. When you're a child, you normally run to one parent more than the other, and that's part of the developmental phase. So these are things that we all have to understand, right? So let's move forward. So when we talk about what does it mean to emulate and imitate, we talked about that already. But let's get into point 7. How do we not fall, truly fall, prey to dangerous things? Well, there's different ways you can do it, but majority of the time, experience is the best teacher of all. Experience will teach some over those who do not have access to learning material. Think Goodwill Hunting, right? There's a scene in Goodwill Hunting where they're at the bar, and it's a Harvard bar. Matt Damon's the character along with Ben Affleck, and they're street kids. I grew up as a street kid, so on and so forth. So I found the scene extremely hilarious. And the gentleman that went to Harvard was trying to pick up the girl, and all he was doing was regurgitating or parroting over and over again what he read in a book. He wasn't being very creative or, as they say, authentic, right? And when they talk about authenticity, if you study Brene Brown, it talks about being vulnerable. So in there, he has to what's it called? Matt Damon's character has to step in for Ben Affleck because he just jumped into the deep end of the pool and he didn't know what he was saying, so he was defending his buddy, etc. But there was a specific line in there that said the same education that you got and you paid $100,000 for, you could have got for a $1.50 library card. And I thought it was hilarious because not only is it true, but with ChatGPT, Google Gemini, the internet, and everything else that's free, along with Class Central, which you heard me speak about before, which gives you certifications and degrees from other schools completely free, I find it hard to believe that certain people are not trying or they tried everything. Normally, if they try to make a list, they only list a couple or a handful of things when they say they tried everything. So, you have to look at experience as being one of those key factors. Now, for myself, I use martial arts and some of the teachings from Kung Fu, JKD or Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's style of martial arts, but I take their philosophies from other styles to understand what it means to protect the body and understand what's known as the center line principle. If you study sports, you have the midfield. That's where everything starts, half court, so on and so forth, etc. And the referees there, and so on and so forth. So in JKD, we have the center line principle because everything down the center of the body is the most vital thing, right? So if you protect the most vital organs, you should be able to protect yourself, right? But when I talk about other things and I want to talk to people about understanding their body, people might, in Buddhism, refer to this as the temple, right? Some people that study the Bible refer to this as a church, right? But most people don't understand that. They think a church is a building, but you're supposed to take care of you, yourself. Your body is the church, right? And then, of course, your words. That is your weapon. That's how you defend yourself, right? Because if you take words and you take the S and you move it to the beginning, it spells sword, right? So you wield a mighty sword, right? Which has been said before. Now, in medicine, this is going to get interesting because this is how we avoid falling into dangerous things because of understanding, being studious, and trying to understand what is being said. So in medicine, this is very interesting. So medicine, there's two symbols. There's one true symbol of the healthcare, so on and so forth, and that is the rod of Asclepius. However, most of the medical symbols that people see today on buildings, mainly hospitals, is the catechus. And the reason why the catechus was put there as a symbol, and I'll take you back into a history lesson. In the early 1900s, the U.S. Army Medical Corps did adopt the catechus, but it was not entirely due to a single assistant surgeon's mistake. The decision was more complex. In 1902, the U.S. Army Medical Corps officially adopted the catechus as its emblem. This may have been influenced by symbolic confusion, as with some people associating the catechus with healing and commerce due to its printing and pharmacy symbol. However, some historians argue that the choice was intentionally, possibly because the catechus association with Hermes, who was linked to travel and messengers, was fitting to military medics. So that's one symbol within the medicine community or the medical community. Now, when we talk about the rod of Asclepius, you also have to remember the Star of Life. Others may refer to it as the Star of David. so on and so forth. And it's a symbol for emergency services. And they have 6 jobs to do, hence the 6 points: detection, reporting, response, on-scene care, care in transit, and transfer to definitive care. Now, the rod of Asclepius, being the true medical symbol, is what lies and resides on the side of an ambulance because, well, there's one snake on the Asclepius, 2 snakes on the catechus, and then a rod in the middle. The rod could represent the body, right? And then you want to keep the body alive. So the ambulance has one job to do. That's why there's possibly, I don't know, 1 snake. Now, if that person is out of their mind or they've been subdued by hypnosis due to neurolinguistic programming and subtle messaging within audio, etc., that's different. Now you have to check not only the body but the mental state as well, hence the 2 snakes. However, there's more to the catechus because it's also a symbol, yes, of Hermes, which was a Greek god of also thieves, crooks, and con men. So we have to look into those things as well. Then moving forward, if you ever seen the movie Aladdin, there's the lamp, and also known as the lamp of life or knowledge. It has roots of symbolism back to Egypt times and culture. However, Florence Nightingale was the lady with the lamp, and she is the source of the lamp as a nursing symbol. So if you ever see a lamp, it's a nursing symbol, like Aladdin had the genie, the little lamp. Think about that. So it's pretty interesting, pretty fascinating. And once you understand to apply the philosophical razors to your everyday life, you'll be able to cut through a lot of the BS when people are speaking, so on and so forth, etc. So, point 8: it is only over time that one learns what is good and bad for them. Now, remember, we started off with all for one and one for all. Now, it was to understand the individual, but you also have to remember each one, reach one, teach one, right? And it's always coming down to one individual because not the whole room isn't trying to learn, nor do they appreciate things until it matters, right? Stop signs don't go up until kids get hit, right? So that's reason one. Now, over time, you develop something called morals and ethics. Ethics are one thing, that's why lawyers and attorneys study ethics. And then, of course, morals could be a little bit loose because it's based upon your own beliefs and understandings and how you're going to carry things out in the world. But, you know, both morals and ethics could be flexible depending on the location, environment, and country that you live in. I mean, let's think about it. Human trafficking is a big thing. And then, of course, if you talk about children, that's another thing. But if you go to another country, it's completely normal. So, what's normal to one person may be odd or upset another, and vice versa. And someone said, if you want to talk to a racist person and show them the European Union arguing. It's a bunch of white people from Europe arguing about how they don't like each other, so on and so forth, etc. And it's not based upon the color of their skin, it's just based upon where they're from because they can't get along. Now, I think that's the most hilarious thing in the world because we all have to live together and people just want something to, as they say, bitch, moan, and complain about because they have nothing else better to do with their life. So think about that when you're looking at different perspectives, right? And there's a reason why in business they say check emotions at the door, and you shouldn't talk about, what is it, politics or religion within the work environment. Well, the reason why is because it's an emotional trigger, especially a hard emotional trigger for those beliefs. And because those beliefs are so strong, well, it's going to upset a lot of people. So people always ask me, political stuff. I'm like, what's the point? What's the point? I was like, we could really talk about this. I said, but I'm going to bring in a bunch of other things, right? Let's talk about splitting a Red Sea, make the other side blue. Or you might think of the flag of France, right? Because you have a blue side and a red side and a white line in the middle. But it's a whole different thing. So, not to go off too much on a tangent on the side, however, it does come down to time. And this is why people say practice patience. Most people aren't patient and they do not listen to understand, they just listen to respond. That was said by Stephen Covey, and that was in the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. So remember, if you talk less, listen more, and try to understand and ask more questions, not only will you be interesting, other people will be interested when you have something to say. Point 9, hypnosis and how to break it so that you do not fall prey to the adversary's attack on your mind that can push you into doing something that you probably should not. So, this is the last point I'm going to make here, and I'm not going to get into in depth, but this will be an intro. But I'm going to point out some of the things that will groom you, so on and so forth, prime you, etc., so on and so forth. So you have environment, culture, then you have external, internal circles, then you have life experiences, finances, education, role models, and outlets of stress. Now, out of all those things, you can only control a handful of them, right? Because the public school system doesn't teach anybody about finances, so on and so forth. That deals with education. You're going to have to learn that on your own. Your internal circles are one thing, and that's based upon who you let into your circle. And then your external circles are those that are close enough to hear, but not close enough to feel. And then, of course, you have your culture. Where were you born, grew up, so on and so forth. Your environment, your household, who you surround yourself by. And then, of course, the people you look up to. Now, the most important thing you can control is your outlets for stress. Most people will find healthy outlets. However, some also find negative outlets. And the reason why is because they're trying to feel something opposite of the negativity or the bad feeling that they have. So they search for something that they think is more positive, right? So they smoke, they get high, they do drugs, they drink, they go to hot yoga for 6 hours, so on and so forth, or they do retail therapy and then return everything because it made them feel better, right? Remember, everything comes down to a feeling, but if you don't care to understand, you won't truly feel what the other person is saying, right? So, last but not least, and remember this because this whole lesson revolved around, well, not only one thing and understanding individuals and society as a whole, not from a just a psychological perspective, but a philosophical one. Remember that it takes a village to raise a child. That is an African proverb, very old. However, it's very true. I've seen many different things, many different environments, and different upbringings as far as how different children were raised by different villages. And it becomes very interesting to see the culture shock when they get introduced to something that is not readily normal or always there. I mean, think about it. During COVID or the coronavirus, because they had to switch the name because it affected the stock price. So they switched it to COVID-19. That affected everybody. People wanted to spend more time with family, work remote, so on and so forth, etc. They got everything that they wanted during that time, and they were still unhappy. Why was that? Some people were never taught to find happiness, maybe. I don't know. They were just taught to push back, right? And so, with that, my friends, and with students, I want to say thank you for paying attention. I know this was, roughly a 30-minute class, but we will be getting into more stuff. Now, for your homework assignment, as you know, I was notorious as far as breaking down the meaning or the links to the number of the lesson to everything else. Last time we talked about numerology with the number 22 and how that goes into astrology and things like that, but most people don't care about that anyways. Um, but how everything comes together, because obviously on the atomic table, that's also titanium, but you care about titanium if you were in the military. Um, so it's a conundrum for people because they care to debate, which is perfectly fine, and instead of actually asking more questions, seeing how everything is connected, right? So I want you to go ahead and figure out what 23 is connected to. And don't cheat and say 23 and me and the whole DNA stuff. I know how you guys are. You could use ChatGPT. I use it all the time. You guys could use AI. I really don't care. However, I do want to see if you understand how and that everything is connected and in one way, shape, or form, it links back to something. Till next time, my friends, take care. Have a great day. Have a great evening. And good night.